It was an ordinary afternoon, quiet and uneventful, the kind of day when nothing unusual is supposed to happen. My husband was away at work, and my son had gone out with his friends. I was moving about the house, tidying here and there, when the doorbell rang. To my surprise, it was my son's friend standing there. He had come by, expecting to meet my son, but when I told him he wasn't home yet, he smiled politely and said he could wait. There was something disarming about the way he stood there, casual yet confident, holding his phone loosely in his hand as though he had all the time in the world. I invited him in, making polite conversation, the way any hostess would. At first, everything felt ordinary. He sat on the sofa, scrolling on his phone while I brought him a glass of juice. But as the minutes ticked by, I found myself noticing things I shouldn't have. The way his laughter filled the room when I made a light-hearted comment, the way his eyes lingered a moment longer when they met mine, the boyish charm that seemed to hold a trace of manhood emerging more strongly than I had ever allowed myself to notice before. I reminded myself that he was just my son's friend. Nothing more. I should treat him as such. But loneliness has a way of twisting even the most ordinary encounters into something heavier, something charged. For months, maybe even years, I had been walking around with a quiet emptiness inside me. My husband, though a good man, had grown distant, absorbed in work, responsibilities, and the weight of everyday life. The tenderness, the warmth, the little sparks of affection that used to make me feel alive had long since faded. And suddenly here was this young man, full of energy, sitting in my living room, reminding me of a part of myself I thought I had lost. We talked more. About trivial things at first: football matches, college classes, music. But then the conversation began to feel easier, flowing in a way I hadn't experienced in a long time. I found myself laughing freely, and in his eyes, I could see the appreciation, as if my presence alone was enough to hold his attention. It was harmless, I told myself. Just conversation. Just company on a dull afternoon. But inside, something deeper was stirring, something I dared not acknowledge. At one point, I excused myself to fetch some papers from my room. When I returned, he was looking at a framed photo of my family on the shelf. He asked a question about it, and before I could even think twice, I found myself inviting him to follow me into my room where I kept older albums and keepsakes. It was an impulsive decision, one I couldn't fully explain. Perhaps I only wanted to prolong the interaction, to keep him close for a while longer. Perhaps I wanted to escape the silence of the house that always felt so heavy when I was alone. As he stepped into my room, I became suddenly aware of the intimacy of the moment. The air felt different here, quieter, more enclosed. I showed him an old album, flipping through the pages, narrating stories of when my son was younger, when life felt lighter. He listened attentively, smiling, nodding, leaning closer to see the pictures. His nearness sent a strange thrill through me, one that made me both nervous and strangely alive. I kept reminding myself that this was dangerous, that I was playing with fire without even realizing it. But then again, wasn't it still innocent? He was only looking at pictures, only laughing at the way my son looked as a child, only sharing a moment of warmth that could mean nothing more. And yet, deep inside, I knew it wasn't just nothing. I could feel the weight of every glance, every pause, every word hanging in the air between us. Time seemed to slow. The sound of the clock ticking in the background grew louder. I could hear my own heartbeat, faster than usual, as though my body knew something my mind was still refusing to admit. I closed the album and placed it aside, suddenly unsure of what to do next. For a moment, silence filled the room, not awkward but charged with something unspoken. I met his eyes, and in that instant, everything I had been pushing away rose to the surface. There was no clear intention, no planned action, only a dangerous curiosity, a pull I couldn't explain. I smiled faintly, pretending to brush off the tension, but my hands trembled slightly as I set the album back on the shelf. He noticed, though he said nothing, his gaze steady, searching mine for meaning. That was the moment I realized I had crossed some invisible line. I hadn't done anything yet, nothing one could call wrong, but my mind, my heart, My very body had stepped into forbidden territory, and I knew there was no turning back. The silence in the room stretched on, heavy but strangely comforting, as though both of us were caught in a moment we didn't quite understand. He shifted slightly, leaning back in the chair, his eyes never leaving mine. I told myself to breathe, to steady the rush of thoughts running wild inside my head. He was just a guest, my son's friend, someone who had no idea of the storm he was stirring within me. Yet every second that passed made it harder to ignore. I tried to fill the silence with words, asking him about his studies, about the plans he had for the future. He spoke with enthusiasm, his voice warm and animated, and I found myself drawn into his energy. It had been so long since I had listened to someone speak with such passion, such hope. My husband rarely shared anything these days beyond the essentials of bills, responsibilities, and schedules. But here was this young man, alive with dreams, and something about his presence made me feel as if I had stepped into another time, another version of myself I thought I had left behind. At one point, I reached over to take the album from his hands, and as my fingers brushed against his, I froze. It was nothing, a simple accident, but the way my skin tingled at that slight contact startled me. He looked at me, just for a second, and there was a flicker in his eyes, something unspoken but undeniable. My breath caught, and for a moment, I forgot where I was, who I was supposed to be. I laughed nervously, trying to brush it off, and he smiled, but his smile carried something different now. Something that told me he had felt it too. The room felt warmer, the walls closer, the air heavier. I stood, pretending to adjust the curtains, needing some distance, but even with my back turned, I could feel his gaze lingering. When I turned back, he was still watching me, quietly, as though waiting for me to decide what would happen next. My heart pounded so loudly, I was sure he could hear it. I wanted to tell him to leave, to remind myself that this was wrong, that nothing good could come of it. But the words never formed. Instead, I found myself sitting back down, closer than before, as if some invisible force was pulling me toward him. He hesitated, his hand resting lightly on the edge of the chair, and for a moment, neither of us moved. The tension was unbearable, a fragile thread stretched too tight, threatening to snap at any second. I lowered my eyes, afraid of what I might see in his, but then he spoke, softly, almost in a whisper. "You seem lonely," he said. The words hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't just an observation. It was the truth I had been trying to hide, the truth I hadn't even admitted to myself. My throat tightened, and I felt a lump forming, but I forced a small smile. "Sometimes," I replied quietly, my voice barely audible. Something shifted between us then, something deeper than curiosity. It was as though he had seen straight through me, past the mask I wore every day, past the careful composure I held around others. For the first time in so long, I felt visible, seen, and that feeling was intoxicating. I don't remember who moved first, or whether it was me leaning closer or him. All I know is that suddenly the space between us disappeared. Our shoulders brushed, our faces only inches apart. My breath quickened, and for a moment, I closed my eyes, torn between reason and desire. When I opened them again, his gaze was still locked on mine, steady and unwavering, filled with a quiet intensity that made my heart race. I told myself this was a mistake, that I should stop before it went any further. But the words never came. Instead, I felt his hand graze mine again, deliberately this time, lingering, waiting for my response. I didn't pull away. I couldn't. Every part of me screamed that this was dangerous, forbidden, but another part, a part one could no longer silence, was desperate to feel alive again, even if only for a moment. When his fingers finally intertwined with mine, I let them. The warmth of his touch spread through me, sending a shiver down my spine. I should have pulled back, should have reminded myself of the vows I had made, of the family I had built. But in that moment, all I could think about was how long it had been since I had felt wanted, how long it had been since someone had looked at me with that kind of intensity. The room grew quieter still, as if the world outside no longer existed. Every sound faded until there was only the pounding of my heart and the shallow rhythm of our breaths. I leaned in ever so slightly, and when his lips brushed mine, soft and tentative, I didn't stop him. I couldn't. It was the briefest of kisses, light as air, but it shattered whatever barrier had been holding us back. When we pulled away, there was no turning back, no pretending it hadn't happened. The line had been crossed, and we both knew it. I stared at him, my chest rising and falling rapidly, and in his eyes, I saw not hesitation but certainty. And for the first time in a long time, I felt alive. After that first stolen kiss, nothing between us could ever go back to the way it was. The moment our lips touched, a boundary had been broken, and though we pulled apart quickly, both of us breathing heavily, the unspoken truth lingered in the air. We didn't talk about it at first. He left soon after, and I sat in my room, my heart still racing, replaying what had happened over and over again in my mind. Part of me was terrified. What had I done? What if my son found out, or worse, my husband? But another part of me, one I could barely control, was secretly thrilled. For the first time in years, I felt a fire inside me, a secret that was mine alone. The next few days, I told myself it had been a mistake. I promised myself that if I saw him again, I would act normal, as though nothing had happened. But when he came back, this time with my son, I couldn't ignore the way my chest tightened just seeing him. He didn't say anything, but the way his eyes flicked toward me when no one was looking told me everything. We both knew what was between us now, a dangerous truth hiding beneath ordinary smiles. It started with small moments. A brush of the hand when passing a glass of water. A glance held too long across the living room. A smile that carried more weight than it should. My son never noticed, too distracted by his games and chatter. But inside, I was constantly on edge, both afraid and excited. Each time he came over, I wondered if something would happen again, and each time I told myself it wouldn't. Yet it always did. One afternoon, when my son stepped out to run a quick errand, we were left alone in the house. The silence was electric, filled with unspoken tension. He moved closer, his voice low as he asked if I was okay. I nodded, but I could feel my hands trembling. He reached out, gently tucking a strand of hair behind my ear, and that single gesture undid me. I leaned into his touch, closing my eyes, and before I could stop myself, I kissed him again, this time without hesitation. From that moment on, the affair became real. We didn't plan it, didn't even talk about what it meant. It simply happened, quietly, secretly, in the shadows of my home. When my husband was at work and my son was distracted, we found stolen minutes together. A hurried embrace in the kitchen when no one was around, whispered words exchanged behind closed doors, the lingering warmth of his presence that carried me through the emptiness of my nights. Each encounter left me both exhilarated and guilty. I would lie awake at night beside my husband, staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying the secret moments of the day. I told myself I was wrong, that I was betraying everything I had built, but the thought of ending it felt impossible. He made me feel seen, alive, cherished in a way I hadn't felt in years. The more time we spent together, the more addicted I became to the secret we shared. But with every stolen moment came the risk of discovery. My son nearly caught us once. He came home earlier than expected, and I barely had time to fix my clothes and pretend I had been busy with chores. The rush of panic left me shaken, but when our eyes met later, we both laughed nervously, the danger somehow making it all the more intoxicating. Still, the fear of being found out lingered like a shadow over every interaction, making my heart race, not just with desire but with dread. I knew what I was doing was reckless. Every time I heard my husband's footsteps in the evening, I felt a pang of guilt so sharp it nearly brought me to tears. And yet, when I was alone, all I could think about was the next time I would see him, the next touch, the next kiss. It was a dangerous cycle, one I couldn't seem to break. The strangest part was how natural it began to feel. We didn't need words to understand each other anymore. A glance, a small smile, a fleeting touch, these became our language, a secret only we shared. And though I told myself again and again that it couldn't last, that sooner or later everything would fall apart. I kept giving in. One evening, after everyone else had gone to bed, I sat alone in the living room, the quiet pressing heavily around me. I thought about the life I had built, the family I loved, and the secret that threatened to destroy it all. And yet, when my phone lit up with his message, a simple, "Are you awake?" I felt that familiar rush, the thrill of knowing he was thinking of me too. I didn't respond right away. I stared at the screen, torn between reason and desire, between the woman I was supposed to be and the woman I had become. In the end, I typed back 3 simple words: "Yes, I am." And with that, the secret continued, deeper than before, more dangerous than ever. The more our secret grew, the heavier it became. At first, it felt like a rush, a hidden fire I could keep burning in the shadows, a part of my life no one else would ever see. But the deeper I sank into it, the more the weight of guilt pressed against me. Every time I looked at my husband, tired from work but faithful in his own way, a voice inside me whispered that I was betraying everything we had built together. Every time my son laughed with his friend, oblivious to what was happening behind his back, my chest tightened with shame. And yet, no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't stop. It wasn't just about the kisses or the stolen touches anymore. It was the way he made me feel when he looked at me, like I was still worth noticing, still worth desiring. It was the way his presence erased the loneliness I had been carrying for so long. I told myself it was temporary, that I would find the strength to end it before things went too far. But with each passing day, the bond between us deepened, tangled in ways I never expected. Then came the night that forced me to face the truth. My husband had left for a late shift, and my son had gone to a friend's house to stay over. The house was quiet, too quiet, and when my son's friend messaged me, asking if he could stop by, I didn't hesitate. I told myself it was foolish, reckless, but I still agreed. When he arrived, the silence between us didn't last long. We fell into each other's arms as though it was inevitable, as though we had both been holding back too much for too long. For hours, we existed in a world that wasn't real, a bubble of stolen intimacy, where nothing else mattered. But when it was over, when the house grew still again and the weight of reality pressed down on me, I felt the crack in my heart widen. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor, my hands trembling. He reached out, touching my shoulder gently, his voice soft as he told me it was okay, that he cared about me. But in his eyes, I saw what I had been denying all along. He was young, still searching for his path, and this was never meant to be permanent. That night, after he left, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake until the sun rose, my thoughts unraveling. I thought about my husband, about the years we had spent together, about the family we had built. I thought about my son, innocent and trusting, who would never forgive me if he knew the truth. And I thought about myself, caught between the woman I used to be and the woman I had become. The realization was sharp, almost painful. I couldn't keep living like this. The next time he came over, I avoided being alone with him. I forced myself to keep things light, casual, as though nothing had ever happened between us. He noticed, of course. His eyes followed me, questioning, searching for answers I couldn't give. Later, when we finally found a moment alone, he asked softly if everything was okay. I swallowed hard, fighting back the ache in my throat, and told him it had to stop. The words nearly broke me. I could see the disappointment in his face, the quiet sadness in his eyes. But he didn't argue, didn't push. He only nodded slowly, understanding in a way that made it even harder. For a moment, I wanted to take it back, to throw caution aside and fall into his arms again. But I held firm. I had to. In the days that followed, the house felt emptier than ever. My husband remained the same, distant but steady. My son remained blissfully unaware, still laughing with his friend, still inviting him over as though nothing had changed. And me? I carried the weight of a secret that would never be spoken, a memory locked away deep inside me. Sometimes, when I caught his friend's eyes from across the room, I felt the echo of what we had shared, a quiet spark of something forbidden that would never fully die. but we both looked away quickly, pretending it had never happened. I knew I would spend the rest of my life wondering if it had been worth it. The thrill, the fire, the sense of being alive again. It had given me something I desperately craved, but it had also left me with scars I couldn't erase. I would smile at my family, play the role I had always played, but inside I would carry the memory of those stolen moments, bittersweet and dangerous. In the end, there was no grand ending, no dramatic revelation. Just silence. Just the weight of a secret affair hidden beneath the surface of ordinary life. And though I would never speak of it, a part of me would always remember the day my son's friend came to our house, and I took him into my room. A choice that changed everything, even if no one ever knew.